It's Monday, so Joe Lindsley is again with us. Joe, welcome back to TVP World. Where are you?
Yeah, hello from Kyiv, Ukrainian capital. It's quiet at the moment, although we did have an attack Saturday morning right before 8 o'clock. And very unusually, the missiles hit before the air raid alarm could sound. That doesn't really happen in Kyiv, so this is unusual.
What do you make of it?
Well, first, I think it's important to focus on the positive. It has now been 54 days since a major Russian nationwide coordinated missile attack on Ukraine. But what happened? It was unusual what happened Saturday morning because the Russians had not sent missiles to Kyiv since September 21st. Which was that's a key point because the next day, September 22nd, Ukraine dealt that decisive blow on the Russian Black Sea Fleet headquarters and on much of the fleet. And since September, the Russian fleet has been on the run, and there's been a noticeable decline in long-range Russian missile attacks upon Ukraine. But there was this little attack, we can say, Saturday morning, and it's disturbing that happened before the air raid alarm could go off. That's normal, for example, in Kharkiv. That happened last night because Kharkiv is so close to the Russian border. But it was unusual that it happened here. But I think we really have to, always consider in this sort of dire situation the absence of the headlines. And again, had Hamas not invaded Israel and had the world not been distracted by that, we generally throughout much of Ukraine have a sense of calm away from the front lines.
Yeah, but the sense of calm away from the front lines, as you just said, could be broken in a while. We are reading a lot of information that Ukraine should expect a kind of another attack on the infrastructure, on the cities, on the civilian infrastructure ahead of winter, because this is the general way that Russian military operates. Is that true? Is that what people in Ukraine expect?
Well, I think this is where we see, especially at this phase of the war, the propaganda is very tricky and sinister. And not just propaganda, but I think lots of journalists or foreign aid workers that come here, they sort of perceive things without really studying the situation very deeply. That's part of the reason why I'm here every single day. I have been every single day since the full-scale invasion without leaving because I believe in Ukrainian democracy. And I think that by being here, I can understand it and articulate the mentality of the people. For example, there's a great reporter, very brave woman, Siobhan O'Grady. She reports with the Washington Post. And we will probably talk more about her story from last week later. But she said, she had this quote in her story, the lack of good news is dampening civilian morale. I don't see that. I was just in Kharkiv recently, 30 miles from Russia. I've never seen more life in that city during the full-scale invasion. Shops and restaurants and businesses are coming back to life. There's street lights, kids playing in the park. It has never been more full of life. And I think even if Ukrainians are ready, if the Russians do start to have these infrastructure attacks like they did last year, which remember, it was every Monday or Tuesday for a while, there were 80 to 100 missiles fired by the Russians upon Ukraine. We've not seen anything like that since last winter. But Ukrainians are ready. The generators are ready. They developed a know-how to get through the dark and the cold. I don't think that's not even something that really weighs on people because they've already endured it and they know how to survive it. And so this sense that there's not an abiding fear of that. And what we do have instead, in the past months, we've seen Ukraine's very sort of sneaky tactical successes in the Crimean Peninsula, hitting Russia. We cannot forget this point that the Black Sea Fleet is on the run. That's extraordinary. Ukraine does not even have a navy.
That's what you just mentioned, that it looks like, and it is also obvious when we look at the official reports, official analysis of the current situation, is that the attacks on the Black Sea Navy made those Russian assets very hard to use. Is it true? Is it really the way it influences the situation in Ukraine? Black Fleet, Russian Black Fleet, is their major asset in this area, strategic asset, and throwing this fleet away of the Ukrainian shores seems to be quite a success of Ukraine, if that's true, if that's what is really happening.
Yeah, and what we don't know, I mean, it's possible that the Russians are also stockpiling weapons so when it does get super cold here, they can try to really pound Ukraine in a small, intense way. Because I think as you saw last year, these attacks every week, Ukrainians were able to bounce back pretty quickly. And so maybe that's what they're doing. But even then, this is a window. We've had, many of these windows throughout the full-scale invasion. There are windows when Russians are doing less, which would be the ideal time, it seems, to get Ukraine, the more ATACMS, long-range missiles, to get Ukraine the tools they need. Ukraine has already shown that they can very precisely hit these Russian military targets. And so this would be the time to do it. And instead of hearing that chorus that, oh, Ukraine is in a position of strength now, we only see these sort of negative headlines and stories. And I think it's very easy to get wrapped up in that if you're outside of Ukraine. And we can talk about, for example, but, it seemed that there was an argument between President Zelensky and the top commander-in-chief, Zaluzhny. And then all of a sudden that trickles down into people writing in the Washington Post that the civilian morale is low. And that's not what I see. I mean, people are tired, but usually morale is lower when I speak with people outside of Ukraine. I was speaking with a Ukrainian woman who's based in Munich, and she's doing a lot of work on investigating the sanctions against Russia. And we're starting to see that Russians have been very good about getting around these sanctions. And she was telling me, her team, which is outside of Ukraine, they feel stuck because they feel that they've sort of, Russians have tricked the world in this. And you do see that. And I think, but here, I mean, if you were to be in any Ukrainian city, even hours after Russian missiles have hit the city, you don't see a lack of morale. You see the opposite.
What does it mean? What does it mean, the change in the morale? Because on one hand, according to what you say, the cities, the big cities look, the regular life in those cities looks almost normal. But on the other hand, when we listen to the interviews of President Zelensky, when we read the info coming from the people who are over there on the ground, it's obvious that people in Ukraine do not want to agree on any kind of peace talks, so-called peace talks, which will affect in giving up land to Russia. And I assume that the high morale of the Ukrainian people is equal to this attitude. The moment when we see that the general public is okay with living and giving back the land could be the moment when the morale could be described as a weaker. Do we have any change in this attitude from your perspective?
Well, even as I say, morale is high. And there's deep sadness and heaviness and anger and frustration at this whole thing. But even as I say, morale is high. There's frustration against the political class. And, I would say universally, everyone I know who's working for victory in some way, so either fighting or volunteering in a significant way, which is many people. There's plenty of people that try to pretend that the war is not happening. But for the most part, people are caring about it and doing all they can. And among those people, which I would say is the majority, General Zaluzhny is the most respected figure. People love him and they trust him. But when we look at the high level, we see, this seeming criticism from Zelensky's administration of Zaluzhny, and for the counteroffensive, not working so well, it seems. There is, among regular people here, there is more confidence in Zaluzhny. Ukrainians do not like political leaders. They're not like Americans where we sort of worship our party hero. That Ukrainians, that's not really in their nature. And so there's much skepticism, especially of people around President Zelensky. There still is respect for him, but there's a healthy criticism. And President Zelensky said after that Time magazine story about him that there will not be elections in a few months, early next year. But I know that behind the scenes, there's a lot of maneuvering going on, even among Ukrainian politicians. and it's always politics anywhere. It's more difficult here because you have
so
an
what do you
existential
make
threat.
of those? Yeah, because this is the question I wanted to, actually two questions that I wanted to ask you. One is regarding the things that we see between General Zaluzhny and President Zelensky, and the second thing is the thing about the upcoming elections. Based on the NATO way of thinking about the state in crisis, state waging a war, for example, one of the fundamental factors that points that state is a healthy state is a state that is capable of running an election process while being at war. It's not always possible, but this is one of the factors that that points to the state which is in a good shape. So, is it possible? Do you think that? What is the meaning of this message that was passed by President Zelensky?
Well, we see not long after he said that, there's this guy who used to be an advisor to Zelensky, Alexei Arestovich, and he is, by the way, no one I know likes him or trusts that guy. He's currently outside of Ukraine, and he's been saying Ukraine needs to negotiate now for territory, to let Russians keep some territory until Putin is gone. And he says that he wants to run for president whenever that happens. And I will say it's very important to note that even Ukrainians who are critical of President Zelensky would definitely take President Zelensky over this guy, Arestovich, any single day. They deeply see him as an agent of the Kremlin. And what we see lately now is that public voices outside of Ukraine who've seemed to support Ukraine are now calling for the ceasefire, which is very strange because this is the moment Ukraine is in a very strong position. What they've done in Crimea, having the Black Sea Fleet on the run, 2 months without a major attack. By the way, we had reports over the weekend that Ukrainians were crossing the Dnieper River. We don't know this for sure, but there is some video evidence of it to the left bank, and have retaken some territory in Kharkiv region. But so I think that this gets missed is that in this moment where Ukraine is actually doing some extraordinary things, why all of a sudden at this moment are there calls for ceasefire? For example, there's a popular British commentator with 500,000 followers on Twitter, Konstantin Keeson, and a year ago he was debating Peter Hitchens. Konstantin was in favor of Ukraine, and now he comes out with these very curious tweets and op-eds saying, "I'm a supporter of Ukraine, and now I say it's time for Ukraine to negotiate." And I think the Russian propaganda is multi-layered, and they have things prepared for different scenarios. And we're starting to see that right now. In this moment when there's no reason for Ukraine.
It's very difficult not to hear this kind of voices from the Western, from the people who are commenting the situation from the Western perspective after what we've heard from White House, for example, that about 90% of the support for Ukraine is already deployed, which doesn't sound like a full-scale support. I understand that in a way this is a kind of a pressure for the political pressure within the U.S. political scene, but it influences the situation on the international opinion market. Let's put it this way, and this influence the way that the conflict in Ukraine, the Russian war against Ukraine, is described by the people you are talking to. From your knowledge and your assessment of the situation in Washington, how should we read those messages about the 90% of the support for Ukraine being already deployed?
Well, we have to look back, and for example, this is interesting timing right now, where the British Prime Minister has picked David Cameron as the new Foreign Secretary. He went to an extraordinary length to make, because Cameron's not in the Parliament, to make him a member of the House of Lords so he can be Foreign Secretary. Cameron was Prime Minister of the UK in 2014 when Obama, Biden were in charge in Washington, and both Washington and London in that time did nothing when Putin took Crimea. They did nothing, and instead they put pressure, and along with Germany, especially, and France, put pressure on Ukraine to agree to ceasefires, which is a word we hear a lot right now regarding Israel. And they put pressure on Ukraine to have ceasefires, and it was that generation of leadership, which included Biden and included Cameron, that enabled Russia to buy the time to stockpile and prepare for this awful full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And so it's interesting that we're seeing these signals from the West. And if you look at, again, from Washington, And this is where, like, for example, last week in the Republican presidential debate, Vivek Ramaswamy just said awful lies about Ukraine, things that aren't even true, that Christianity is oppressed. It's the complete opposite, really. But there's something very shrewd happening there. So when these Republican opponents of Biden, some of them are speaking, like Vivek Ramaswamy, they're very smartly appealing to a mood in America. Americans' morale is low, I think lower than in Ukraine. Americans are burned out. They're tired of being controlled by corporate political elite, the cost of living. They feel frustrated and they don't see a way out. And someone like Vivek is appealing to them and saying, look, I'm a new guy. I'm going to do something very different. But if you look closely, he's not even based in the real facts. And if you really want to find a way to awaken the American people with a new sense of that democracy is possible, look to Ukraine. The only reason this war is happening is because Ukrainians kicked out the corrupt elite, Russians and others that were trying to plunder this country in 2014. Ukrainians are an example of how to reinvigorate your democracy, how to renovate your democracy. And no Republican really is seasoned upon this. They either look at Ukraine, oh, we need to help them, it's a poor, sad situation, or they paint some total lies about Ukraine. But in the middle is the truth, which is this is people who stand up for freedom. I was just interviewing a friend on our podcast with Ukrainska Pravda. He said, freedom is our religion. And I see that every day here. And so that gets completely missed. And even from the White House, we've never heard strong rhetoric about Ukraine's 2014 revolution. Because, by the way, when Biden was tasked with the Ukraine portfolio when Obama was president, and we were absent during that time. And so there's always been this disconnection between the White House and Ukraine. And as I say many times, if you look at the numbers, it's not the billions that we think. The United States has benefited immensely. This is why Poland is buying $10 billion worth of HIMARS and other weapons, because Ukraine has shown how these weapons can work on a very small scale. And so the Washington support has never been what it seems. And I think that there's a lot of fear in London and Washington and Berlin and Paris of a world without Moscow. And that's something that Ukrainians deeply want and they believe is possible. And if you look at how they've resisted, it is amazing to think we got through last winter where every week, 100 missiles a week. That should have killed the nation. 100 missiles a week targeting infrastructure. It was dark and cold, no water. And here we are. And people were actually moving back to their cities and ready for this. This is the definition of I would call it virtue-based resistance. And this is what's getting missed in the American, sort of the gamesmanship of American politics. What would be nice is if some American leaders could break through this and say, look, this is the example. We're all frustrated and burned out in America. Look to Ukrainians. Let's get them everything they need so we can actually have a model of how to resist tyranny.
Joe, you mentioned David Cameron and his political decisions while he was a prime minister, but I think it's worth mentioning that as just a regular citizen, he was active, one of those people who were active in his support for Ukraine, taking a ride from London to Ukraine with the support. We got 30 seconds. Your command.
Yeah, I'm not saying Cameron is a bad choice, and no comment on that. But it's just interesting. We have to remember, especially now when we hear calls for ceasefire with Israel vis-a-vis Hamas. Remember what ceasefires did from 2014 to 2022, and this is the problem when we don't have leadership, when we appease the tyrants. Again, Churchill, 1930s. It's always the same story, and this is a moment to stop it right here. And that's what Ukrainians are doing.
Joe. Did anything change regarding the fundraising? Is the current situation, how does it look like?
It's difficult. It's difficult. We welcome support at UkrainianFreedomNews.com. I mean, the guys at the front need still trucks and drones, really drones especially. This is the biggest need while they wait for bigger and better equipment from the West. And I think this is the best thing we can say is, so much time and energy has been invested in this now. This is the worst time to give up. And so anyone who's already, if you want to make this worthwhile and look back on how we acted in this time, as though we were living in the 1930s, here's how you choose how to do it now.
Joe Lindsley, thank you very much. We see each other next week.
Till next week.